There is a war happening inside you right now, not outside, not in your circumstances, your bank account, your relationships, or the opinions of the people around you. Inside, in the 6 inches between your ears where every battle that has ever determined the direction of your life has been fought and won or lost before a single visible thing changed. Most people lose this war without ever realizing they were fighting it. They wake up every morning with intention and go to bed every night with excuses. They make plans with clarity and abandon them with creativity. They stand at the edge of everything they have ever wanted and then, quietly, convincingly, with a voice that sounds exactly like their own, they talk themselves back from the ledge and call it wisdom. Your greatest enemy is not your circumstances. It is not your past. It is not the people who doubted you or the opportunities that passed you by or the timing that was never quite right. Your greatest enemy is the voice in your own mind that says not today. That whispers you are not ready. That has been negotiating with your potential for so long it has started to feel like your own opinion. That voice has stolen more dreams than failure ever could, and it is winning. Stay with us because today we are telling the story of Maverick, a man who spent years losing a war he did not know he was fighting, and the unexpected moment that finally showed him where the real battlefield was. And if stories like this one matter to you, subscribe, because somebody out there needs to hear exactly this today. Maverick was 33 years old and had a gift for making fear sound reasonable. He was intelligent enough to construct an airtight case against almost any risk, articulate enough to present his hesitation as strategy, self-aware enough to recognize in his most honest moments that something was holding him back, but not yet clear enough to name it for what it actually was. He had been calling it caution. He had been calling it preparation. He had been calling it patience, pragmatism, the wisdom of a man who understood that timing mattered and who was simply waiting for the right moment to move. The right moment never came. Maverick had grown up in a household where the consequences of failure were felt loudly and the rewards of success were received quietly. His father Morris had worked the same factory job for 27 years, not because he loved it, but because it was safe, and safe in their house was the highest available virtue. His mother Mildred had raised 3 children on the understanding that ambition was admirable in other people's sons and dangerous in her own. The message had never been spoken directly. It had been transmitted in the way messages always are in families, through what was celebrated, what was warned against, and what was simply never discussed. By the time Maverick was old enough to have ambitions of his own, he had already inherited the architecture of fear that had been built around him before he could question it. He was 33 and running a modest freelance design practice that paid his bills without ever threatening to change his life. He had the talent for considerably more. His work was genuinely distinctive, the kind that made people stop and look twice, the kind that clients remembered and referenced and came back for. His colleague Morton had told him this directly and often, with the blunt generosity of someone who had watched Maverick undercharge and undercommit for long enough to find it frustrating. But talent, in Maverick's hands, had become a private possession rather than a public offering. He kept it close, showed it selectively, pitched below his level, priced below his value, and stayed well within the boundaries of what felt safe, which is to say, well within the boundaries of what would never require him to risk the kind of failure that the voice in his head had been describing in vivid detail for as long as he could remember. The voice was his most constant companion. It arrived reliably whenever the distance between where Maverick was and where he was capable of going became visible. When a significant opportunity appeared, the voice produced reasons it was too soon. When a bold idea surfaced, the voice generated evidence it would not work. When someone expressed belief in his potential, his friend Masai, who had been encouraging him with a patience that bordered on the saintly, or his cousin Maida, who had built her own business from nothing and could not understand why Maverick had not done the same, the voice reframed their confidence as naivety and his own hesitation as realism. It was sophisticated. It was persuasive. and it sounded exactly like him. The crisis arrived not dramatically, but in the form of a conversation Maverick had been avoiding for months. A significant client, the kind that would have changed the scale of his practice entirely, had approached him through a mutual contact. The brief was substantial, the budget was real, and the work was precisely the kind Maverick had been privately imagining himself doing for years. He had sat with the opportunity for 2 weeks, drafting and deleting a response, building and dismantling a proposal, circling the thing he wanted without landing on it. Then the client went elsewhere. Morton told him. Not unkindly, just factually, the way a friend delivers information they know will sting. The client had gone to someone with less talent and more confidence, someone who had responded within 24 hours with a proposal that was, by Morton's account, considerably less impressive than anything Maverick could have produced. Maverick sat with this for a long time. He had not lost the opportunity to a more capable competitor. He had surrendered it to the voice in his own head before the competition had even begun. The fear had not protected him from failure. It had delivered him directly into it, quietly, without a sound, in the 2 weeks he had spent waiting to feel ready enough to respond. That evening he went home and did something he had not done in years. He sat in complete silence and asked himself an honest question. Not what do I want? Not what should I do? But what am I actually afraid of? Not the surface answer, the real one. The one underneath the caution and the preparation and the careful language of pragmatism. He sat with the question for a long time, and what came up, slowly and uncomfortably, was this: he was afraid of becoming visible. Afraid that if he pitched at his real level, operated at his real capacity, put his actual best work in front of the world, and it was rejected, the rejection would not just be of the work, it would be of him, the real him, the one he had been protecting behind layers of strategic smallness for as long as he could remember. The voice had not been keeping him safe from failure. It had been keeping him safe from the possibility of being truly seen and found wanting. And in doing so, it had guaranteed the very outcome it claimed to be protecting him from. The shift came 3 days later on a Sunday afternoon. Maverick was at his desk, not working, just present in the vicinity of work in the way he had perfected over years, when he found himself watching an old recorded lecture by Napoleon Hill that a friend had shared in a group conversation months earlier and that he had bookmarked without watching. He watched it now. Hill's voice was measured and without sentiment. The argument was direct. He spoke of inner enemies, not metaphorical ones, but precise, identifiable forces operating inside the mind of every person who had ever stood between their current life and the life they were capable of building. Fear, doubt, hesitation, the dangerous comfort of delay. He described them not as feelings but as mechanisms, automatic, conditioned, reinforced by years of repetition until they operated with the efficiency of reflex rather than the weight of choice. And then Hill said something that stopped Maverick completely. He said a weak mind obeys its emotions. A powerful mind commands them. Maverick played it back 3 times. He had spent 33 years believing that his fear was information, that the voice of doubt was a signal worth heeding, that the hesitation he felt in the face of risk was the sound of his own intelligence protecting him from consequences he could not afford. He had never once considered that it might be the sound of a conditioned pattern running automatically, a mechanism built from someone else's fear, inherited before he was old enough to question it, reinforced by years of compliance until it felt indistinguishable from his own judgment. The fear was not his wisdom. It was his conditioning. And conditioning, unlike character, could be changed. He did not transform overnight. He was honest with himself about that later, and honest in the way that matters, without romanticizing the process into something cleaner than it was. The voice did not disappear. It had been too long a resident for eviction to be immediate, but something fundamental had shifted in the way Maverick related to it. He had stopped treating it as truth and started treating it as a pattern. And patterns, once seen clearly, lose a portion of their power simply by being named. He began with one decision. He called the mutual contact who had introduced him to the client he had let slip away and asked directly whether the engagement was still available or whether any element of it remained open. It was not. But the contact, impressed, Maverick would later learn by the directness of the call, referred him to a different opportunity 3 weeks later that was larger than the one he had missed. This time Maverick responded in 12 hours. The proposal he submitted was not the hedged, carefully modest document he would have produced 6 months earlier. It was the full version, the real version. The one that showed exactly what he was capable of without the strategic smallness he had been using as armor. It was the kind of proposal that could only be rejected by someone who did not need what he specifically had to offer, which meant the rejection, if it came, would tell him something useful rather than confirming his deepest fear. It did not come. He got the engagement. And in the weeks that followed, working at the level he had always been capable of, visible in the way he had always been afraid to be, Maverick discovered something that the voice had never told him. That the exposure he had spent years protecting himself from was not the danger he had imagined. That being truly seen at his real capacity by people who recognized what they were looking at felt nothing like the annihilation he had been dreading. It felt like arriving somewhere he should have been a long time ago. Over the following year, Maverick rebuilt his practice from the ground up, not structurally, but philosophically. He priced at his real value. He pitched at his real level. He said yes to the opportunities that frightened him and no to the ones that merely felt safe. He failed occasionally, which was new, and discovered that failure at full capacity was a different experience entirely from the slow suffocation of permanent smallness. Mass told him he seemed different. He told her he had simply stopped losing a war he had not known he was fighting. The war Napoleon Hill described is real. It is not fought in boardrooms or markets or the external arenas where success is eventually displayed. It is fought in the mind, in the 6 inches of internal territory where every decision that has ever mattered began as a thought that was either obeyed or commanded. Most people lose this war not because they are weak, but because they never realized they were fighting it. Because the voice of fear sounds so much like the voice of wisdom that the distinction requires a level of honest self-examination that is uncomfortable enough to be endlessly deferred. But here is what Maverick's story teaches us. Your greatest enemy does not live in your circumstances. It does not live in your past or your competition or the difficulty of the road ahead. It lives in the voice that tells you not today, that convinces you to wait, that has been negotiating with your potential for so long it has started to feel like your own opinion. That voice is not you. It is conditioning wearing your face. And once you see it clearly, once you name it, understand its mechanism and refuse to mistake it for wisdom, it loses the one thing that has always given it power over you, your belief that it was telling the truth. Clarity crushes confusion. Discipline silences emotion. And identity, the one you choose deliberately rather than the one you inherited by default, creates the destiny that fear has been promising to protect you from all along. Maverick spent 33 years losing a war nobody could see. The day he finally saw it was the day it ended. The war inside you is real, the enemy is real, and the outcome has always been yours to determine. The only question is whether you are ready to stop obeying the voice and start commanding it. If this story moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today.